quick heads up, this episode touches on sensitive topics like trauma, abuse, and sexual molestation. Please listen with discretion and care. Hey everyone, Johan here. Welcome back to Journey with Care. As we take a short break before launching Season 4 this February, we wanted to handpick and recut some of our most memorable, some of our most favorite episodes. These were chosen because they continue to inspire, challenge, and encourage us to love others well. And they're just really good episodes, and we believe that they're worth a second listen or a first if you haven't listened to it yet. So whether you're hearing them for the first time or rediscovering their impact, we hope that these episodes will speak to you in meaningful ways. This first one was actually the first that I've hosted by myself with Journey with Care. I was still getting my feet wet with hosting in general, so it was a little rough around the edges, but the story that Jared brings is very inspiring. We did it in 2 parts, so we'll do one this week and one next week. Such an amazing story, so I want to encourage you, listen to it again or the first time. Again, these have been remastered, recut a little bit so that they're a little bit easier to listen to. So enjoy this revisited conversation with Jared Ross from Season 2. On today's episode, I'm going to have a conversation with my friend Jared Ross. I met Jared back in 2016 when I was with a team helping out at a youth conference in Eston, Saskatchewan. My first experience with Jared was seeing this young Indigenous fellow step up to the mic in one of the sessions and shift the atmosphere in a room as he began to sing. I remember turning to a friend beside me, and our eyes were big, and we both understood what each of us was thinking. This guy has something. He is anointed and has a gift and calling on his life. And Jared and I have had relatively short meetings and conversations over the years. I'm excited that I actually get to sit down and hear his story. Jared, welcome to the Journey with Care podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, the plan is to have 2 different conversations with you over the next few episodes. In this one, I really just want to get your story and maybe help us as the larger church to understand some of those moments in your life that have influenced your pursuit with the Lord and the calling on your life. All right, so let's go back. Tell us a bit about your journey. Where did you grow up? What was your home life like?
So grew up in Cross Lake, Manitoba, which is about a 8-hour drive. Sometimes you can do it in 7.5. But I think just what a normal life looked like. Actually, Cross Lake is called Pemichikamak Cree Nation, so that's where I grew up. Everybody probably knows where it's from because we have a famous guy who's from there named Ernest Moniaz, initially called King of the North, apparently, but he's my grandfather.
What was he famous for?
Well, he's a famous Indigenous singer-songwriter. So he writes like old, sometimes I think his first album was originals that he wrote. So I think that's like part of my half family where the music comes from for sure. Also, we're famous for having a NHL player, Brady Keeper from Cross Lake, Manitoba. Plays for the Vancouver Canucks now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's what we're known for at the moment. I think we're very proud of those two. But just growing up in Cross Lake, what a normal day looked like if we're not doing school from like 9 to 3. I think just around the house, I was used to just growing up with my grandmother and my aunts and uncles in the same house, about maybe 6 of us living there in a 5-bedroom place. Wake up to grandmother either smoking fish or she's making fresh bannock each time I wake up. So like there was always food for one thing I remember, but bannock was kind of a normal thing. I was glued to the TV when I was young, so I didn't really get a chance to experience like my family does hunting, my family does trapping. Other than food being baked around, we always had visitors over. It's a big thing in my grandmother's place. It's just hospitality was one thing. And we had a ton of visitors. We had a lot of food, a lot of family gatherings. We watched a lot of movies as a family too. So like movies were a big thing.
So did you grow up with any siblings around you?
Yeah. Before I knew they were my brothers, I went to school with 2 of my siblings. So brother Lyndon was the first one born. I was the second one. And Dusty was the young one. That was before Harlan was born, which is my other brother from my dad's side. I went to school with these guys and we became friends, but this was before I knew they were actually my brothers because their dad was my dad. But yeah, my sister Marilyn was born, I think when I was about maybe 8 or 9. So she was the first sibling I had growing up around my grandmother's place. And then my mom got married, second sibling, Nikki, but she mostly grew up with her in Brandon, Manitoba. So I used to travel there when I was 13 just to get away from the reserve for a while. Dad thought it would be good for me to experience what city life was like at that age. 12-hour, 13-hour travels from Cross Lake to Brandon was kind of the thing for 3 summers. On top of that, we had a lot of cousins too. So like we had a lot of them running around. So I feel like I didn't just have 6 siblings. I felt like I had over 50 sometimes.
So what would you say was the role that you played in your household?
My family tells me like I'm the youngest sibling of cousins. Like I was the first one born out of all of them. So I think that first role model thing was given to me, like you're kind of the oldest, so you need to set an example in some way. So I think they were kind of just like proud in a way. They just used to tell me, yeah, Jared's the like first of the youngest siblings of cousins. So like he's the first one and he's doing this stuff. And it wasn't until I became a Christian, they put me more on a pedestal I didn't want to be on, where it's just like, I didn't want them to be like, okay, he's a Christian, so follow his example. You know, he's not drinking, he's not doing this or something like that. So I remember that. So just like even now, what I feel is my role as being the oldest cousin is just being there for them when they need me, just to be a listening ear if they need to talk to me. Most of the time, it's just like you move away for a while and my cousins usually just like shake my hand when I come home, or before it used to be like, we used to tease each other and stuff like that. But I think now that in some way we got older, it's just always handshakes. But at the same time, I just want to let them know, you know, I'm still your cousin. You know, you can talk to me about anything. And I just want to be there for each and every single one of my cousins, my siblings, just to be that person they can talk to and listen to, because, you know, I went through a lot and I feel like my story is mostly like I went through some things that a kid should never go through. And that's kind of just what I want to be for my cousins, where like, hey, whatever you have going on, I understand. But if it's like hard drugs, I never touch that stuff. But at the same time, just like help me understand what you're going through and why you're doing what you do, you know, stuff like that, just being a listening ear.
So you said you became a Christian at some point, and that's kind of where they set you on a pedestal. Did you feel the pressure of that from your family?
I mean, I'm not sure if they ever put me on that, but I think personally for me, I was just like, I didn't want to be on that if they tried voicing it to them. But yeah, I think when I became a Christian, I think I was the first one to convert to Christianity, because my family is mostly from like a Roman Catholic and United background. What I remember mostly from that, going to church with them, was just like, it's usually on occasions. Christmas, they had mass, so we went to that as a family. Prayer was introduced to me from my grandmother. She always prayed during the bigger meals like Thanksgiving or Christmas. So like I was introduced to Jesus at a young age. But I remember going to a Sunday school, the Reserve, and we just colored a picture of Jesus. I was just like, I don't know what this is about. And we just saw pictures of him where he's like white, blonde hair, blue eyes, you know. So that was my first introduction on that. But it's, again, coming back to being a Christian and the pressure. I think it was just like understanding the gospel at a young age. And it's just like, it's not about religion, it's about relationship, obviously, for one thing. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, I still make mistakes. I'm not a perfect person anymore or something like that. The pressures of being a Christian at that age was just like, I still make mistakes. I'm still the same Jared. I'm not just like one and done Christian. And, you know, sometimes you slip a curse word when you're driving in Winnipeg, or you get frustrated, your patience runs dry sometimes living in a city, and, you know, little things like that. But
so let's go back. Tell me that story about when you decided to make that decision to follow Jesus.
One of my best friends, Nathan Halcrow, came into my life when I was about 17. I went to a metal show. It was his band, and they used to do a bunch of free shows on the Reserve. But I remember meeting him, and he was like completely different than what I would expect, because metalheads, they're usually like tough. But this guy was all smiles, and I was just like, dude, you're not the person I expected you'd be. And then we went on a Canadian heritage trip in our high school. We went to like Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and Quebec. But it wasn't until I shared a room with him, he actually like opened up the Bible in front of me and just pointed at it. You believe in that stuff? He's like, yeah, I'm a Christian. And it was from that trip on, like, we did a lot of walks on the Reserve, and he started sharing his faith towards me. And I think most of the times, like, I always had a belief in God ever since I was like young. Walking home, I was always scared to walk in the dark, so like I had to talk to God. So I always believed, but it wasn't until he shared what the gospel was and who Jesus was, and I remember asking him, like, can Jesus forgive you for this? Can Jesus forgive you for swearing or smoking cigarettes or drinking like this and that? And he made it very clear that Jesus forgives. He's a loving father and this and that. And he started sharing me about Eston College and Encounter and what the worship was like, because on the reserve, I was so used to not seeing youth in the church. And he was telling me about some youth raising their hands, dancing at the altar, and just experiencing freedom in worship. But yeah, it wasn't until I met him I was introduced to the gospel. And I think when I was 18 to 19, that's when he shared his faith, and I gave my life to the Lord when I was 19, which was March of 2012. I think it's marking close to the 10-year or 11.
You said growing up you went through some things that no one should have to go through. Are you willing to share what some of those things were?
Yeah. I think this is where it just gets more vulnerable, and I'm usually an open book, and I don't mind sharing about it. But yeah, I think one of the things for me was, we learned about residential schools at a young age in the educational system. We were all taught about that. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that, even though we didn't attend residential schools, we kind of, got the bad fruit of it. It was still in our house. Mostly my family members who did go, abused alcohol sometimes. And I remember waking up to a bunch of partying. I think that's how they just dealt with the pain and trauma from it. And in the comfort of my own grandmother's house, like I was sexually molested by my cousin. And I think that brought a lot of confusion and a lot of anger, but it wasn't just my cousin. I dealt with it from a friend of mine too. And I think just the closest people who I thought would be the ones protecting me actually did that stuff to me. So like, I think that brought a lot of confusion and anger. And on top of that, there was like a lot of bullying at school. I was initially known as the gross kid in school at a young age. Growing up in a house where I had a grandfather, like I don't blame him for this, but I was exposed to pornography, I think at 7. He was watching it in the living room and I was sitting there not knowing what was going on. I was just watching cartoons like 5 seconds ago, and then he just switched the channel. I remember my grandmother coming and just yelling at him, just saying like, why are you watching this? He's sitting there. And I was just like, I don't know what's going on. But like monkey see, monkey do, you get curious. Like I didn't have my mom or dad around when I was young. So I had my aunts and uncles, so no one taught me about what sex was or birds and the bees and what to do, what not to do. So like I had a next door neighbor and we just did some things we weren't supposed to. And I remember losing my innocence at the age of 9, 8. And that was such a young age just to experience what sex was, and waiting till marriage. I didn't hear any of that stuff. So some people caught wind of who I lost my virginity to, and she was known as the gross girl in school, and I became that instantly. So all my friends who were girls turned against me, and on top of that, bullying from I think like grade 2 to graduation. Basically, I had problems with women in general because I didn't have my mom around, and dealing with that earlyhood trauma of losing my innocence and dealing with the sexual molestation from cousin and friend. I was just like very angry. So the way I dealt with it was just smoking cigarettes and going out for sports. I felt like that was the only way I could release some tension that I was dealing with. But I think realizing like where I'm from and how much we hold on to such trauma, that from residential school, that I know I didn't go, but I felt like I dealt with the bad fruit of it, and it was in the comfort of my own home. And I feel like we're still dealing with this hurt that, it takes more than just to pray it away or just being there, but we definitely need a lot of healing from it. And I had to walk through that with God, and it wasn't easy, but he definitely was very patient. And I think just, I remember one day in college, he showed me a vision of residential schools. I remember there's a scene in that movie, Passion of the Christ. He was about to be whipped by the Roman soldiers. And there's one scene where he looks at the camera, and I was brought to that in a closed eye vision, and he brought me to his eyes, and I saw everything about First Nations people, like missing and murdered Indigenous women in his eyes. And I saw the residential schools, and I pretty much saw everything that the First Nations people gone through. And I came out of his eyes, and he said, "Tell your people I remember them." And then the whip came down, and I remember coming out of that vision just bawling my eyes out. And that's when I knew, like, okay, so residential schools weren't from you. And realizing in Revelation 7, 9 to 10, where it talks about, I saw all tribes and all tongues coming together and holding palm branches, and salvation belongs to our King. And I was like, well, this makes sense why you made us who we are. We're not to be ashamed to be Indigenous, to be First Nation. Because initially the I think the intent of residential schools was to kill the Indian and to not make them speak their language. And just, it's like, yeah, that wasn't from you. You know, you made us Indigenous for a reason. You want us to be proud, and you helped us and created us to live off the land. I feel like that's from you too, you know? So I dealt a lot with that, and him just showing me that stuff, it just gave me a lot of vision on, you know, being a Indigenous leader as well.
Obviously, you've had a lot of dialogue with the Lord through this, even through that vision.
Mm-hmm.
So you've had to come through some healing. I mean, we still deal with things from our past, but what did that healing journey look like for you to get you where you are today?
I think most of my healing journey came from Eston College. I walked through it there. I think the Lord showed me a lot going to that college. But I think it first started was when I first became a Christian. I remember coming home from Eston College encounter weekend, and I remember just reading through the Bible, reading through the Gospels. I remember just reading from Matthew to John. There was this one in Matthew after he mentions, I think it's Matthew 5. It was after the Lord's Prayer. Right after that portion of scripture, it mentions, if you forgive those who sinned against you, my Father in heaven will forgive you in heaven. And if you withhold that forgiveness, then my Father in heaven won't forgive you of your sins. And I remember in that moment, that's when he brought up my cousin molesting me. And I remember pushing away the Bible. I was like, why did you bring that up? Like, why did you bring that up? I remember just shaking, walking around my dad's trailer at the time. I was like, why? You know, why did you bring that up? I remember just asking that question a bunch. And it took me a while to like calm down. And again, just the Lord's patience. I felt like he was walking me through it, and he didn't have to say a word when I was asking him why. But I remember just sitting down, and I remember asking him again, like, why did you bring that up? And he said to me, like, okay, Jared, think about this. You were at Encounter and you experienced me. What was that like? So he kind of reflected the time I gave my life to him. And I remember just like, well, I felt peace and freedom for the first time. You know, if I can better explain on what that was like, I felt like my birthday, New Year's, and Christmas rolled into one. And I was like, I've never felt that before. I never felt freedom. I felt like myself. I really felt truly, I found who I was supposed to be. And I was just experiencing that forgiveness. I could never just, I feel like thank you's not enough from giving it to Jesus. He said, well, don't you think your cousin deserves that? Don't you think she deserves that same forgiveness? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. And he just told me, read it again. He just telling me, if you forgive those who sinned against you, my Father in heaven will forgive you. And I'm just thinking about, well, I can't imagine what she went through. You know, she probably didn't mean to do it. I can't imagine the shame that she's carrying, you know. I remember just praying, Lord, this is really hard, but help me learn to let go. And I don't want to hold on to this. I don't want this to stop me from following you. Just take it. And I remember just praying that. And it wasn't until actually last year, you know, he kind of reminded me, is like, saying it to yourself is one thing, but you're going to have to tell her one day. And I was like, well, I'm not ready for that. And then I was sitting in a church service, and Rhythm was sharing about being an Indigenous woman and how she was ashamed of that, but now walking in that calling and just having the power that she has now through Jesus and accepting her identity. And I remember hearing the Lord tell me now. And I remember just looking up at the ceilings like, oh, you want me to do that now? He's like, yeah, this is the right time. And, you know, the Lord's timing is perfect. And I remember just messaging my cousin, just letting her know, like, hey, you know, I remember what happened at Gokum's house. And I remember telling her, like, I know you're probably going to say I don't remember doing this to you, but, you know, a kid doesn't forget what happens to him at a young age, especially when it did so much. And that trauma I held on to from it. But I told her, like, I don't want to look at you this way anymore. You know, you're family, and I can't imagine if this was bothering you. But again, the reason why I'm bringing it up is because this is Jesus doing this through me. And I want you to know that he loves you, he forgives you, and wants a relationship with you. And I just let her know, hey, I remember being molested, and I remember the stuff that I had to deal with. It was more than once, and it happened at Gokum's house. And he had a good way of hiding it. And I just let her know, don't feel that shame anymore. I'm letting it go. Your family, I love you, and I'm praying for you. And I remember she just left it on red, and she didn't have to respond. And after that, I remember sitting in that church service and feeling such freedom. I remember just even looking outside was different because I let something go that I was holding on to for so long. And I remember I had to go up and share because I had to lead worship. And I was like, guys, I can't hold on to this. Like, as a church, we shouldn't be just like shocked of what we share, you know? But I just want to let you know that I let go of this sexual molestation that happened to me. And I just feel such freedom right now that I'm not holding on to this anymore. You know, I just want to let you know that I'm feeling such a freedom that I've never felt before until I first became a Christian. And I remember a few people coming up after me just with tears in their eyes, just saying like, the Lord's doing such a powerful work through you. And they were feeling something with what I shared. And I remember my friend Barrick just had tears in his eyes. Can I give you a hug, man? He was just, just the vulnerability I have and how the Lord set me free. That was definitely something I always look back on in that healing journey that it took to get there. It was just like the Lord's patience is everything, and how his timing is perfect, and how he walked me through it was just like, a patient father. It felt like it took 7 years almost, but he was very patient and bringing the right people along and to prophesy over me, pray for me, and just really seeing who the dad he was definitely what brought that healing forth. And so that's the healing journey that it took me to get there, basically.
Have you had to have any more interactions with this cousin after that?
Like I've seen her a few times, and it wasn't until I saw her at Kildonan Place that I felt like, okay, this is still not gone. Still have to talk with her. And that's when that conversation came up on the thing. But no, we haven't had an interaction since then. Like I haven't reached out to call to see how she's doing, but I know like I want her to take time to think about what I said. And I don't want to feel like I have to get to her and it's like, everything's okay now. But I want her to actually just like take the time to reach out to me too. Cause, I don't know how she deals with things because she's not a Christian either. And I don't know how she feels about religion, but it's just like ever since that chat, she hasn't reached out to me.
Have you ever pictured what it'd be like if she came to Jesus?
I'd be very happy for one. That's my ultimate goal, is just to see all my family saved, right? And if I pictured that, I just like, man, I can't imagine what the Lord would walk her through, and just to be that person for her still, that Christian influence, just to let them know like, hey, what questions you have about Jesus, I can probably answer those for you. But yeah, that's one of the things, like I'd be very stoked and very happy if she did that. And I'm praying for her.
On this podcast, we've talked about in the past, like one of the questions we've asked people for that first season, especially, we focused on reconciliation and the church with the Indigenous people. So what does the word reconciliation mean to you as someone that has been in a white church and a white Bible college primarily?
So I think like the reconciliation part, like the way that I live my Christian life is like I try and go by the word and what it says, So ministry of reconciliation out of 2 Corinthians 5:18 about, the Lord reconciling people to him, but also at the same time, we carry this ministry of reconciliation and we're just pleading, come back to God. I think that's just the way I viewed reconciliation, was just like, okay, that's what I want for my people as well. And seeing that vision, and also just the Revelation scripture that I mentioned, is just like the ministry of reconciliation to me just means like, I want them to be healed from this trauma that came from residential schools. I feel like if we go through that and also just walk through that healing of what happened, but also just not carrying that shame anymore, I feel like we'll just see such a huge revival that comes out of the First Nations people. There's so many young people who are still walking through what I did and not getting the gospel in such a true form. And I feel like once they understand on the healing process, but also understanding the true gospel, I feel like the youth are the key to reach out to every youth in Canada. And I feel like this revival would just start from the First Nations people. I've been getting pictures and visions from people who got that for me, where it's just like I just see empty war outposts of youth being, these are callings that they have on their lives, and then we're just waiting for them to get to these empty outposts. And I feel like they're the key to be reached out, because there was so much of them dying from suicide and just saying, my life's not enough. And just bringing that ministry of reconciliation is just like, come back to God. That's just what I view as reconciliation, is just like taking time to heal more than just praying it away. Actually walking through healing with them is one thing.
So what would you say is one of the most misunderstood things about being an Indigenous young person in a white church?
I think the think for me from Eston College, I think nobody knew how to deal with what I was going through. I dealt with a lot of insecurities. I think there were times where, I didn't go to class because I was dealing with so much shame. And at the same time, just the way I handled things was differently because I was walking through healing and I didn't know how to, or nobody guided me on how to walk through it. And I think at that point, like, people started seeing me as like, okay, sometimes Jared doesn't come to class. Sometimes, sometimes he makes inappropriate jokes. Like, there's a lot of leaders that are hearing like land stealing jokes. But I think one of the things that people don't understand is like, we came from such a tight knit community in Cross Lake, Manitoba, or even just like Oxford House or anywhere. Then a kid coming from that community to Eston College, and there's such a culture shock to us, even, where it's just like, oh, so you didn't grow up in a low income family. And I noticed right away, like, there's certain jokes that I made on the reserve that are not funny towards white people. And I was just like, okay, maybe I need to change my tone. And so like the leaders saw and heard all this happening, and I felt like they didn't understand, okay, what is going on. And they probably just saw me as a kid who was, on academic probation because he's not going to class and this and that, when really I was just like struggling to figure out, okay, how do I do this thing? Writing papers is a challenge, and nobody taught me how to write papers because our education level on the reserve is very different compared to what they're learning in Winnipeg or something like that. I remember being told from a teacher that we're on a grade 6 level and Winnipeg's on 10. Like, that's how far behind we are in our education. And I wasn't prepared for the real world, basically. And I think most of the time, the kids that do go to college or university, they always come back from the reserve. They go out for a while, and then 2 months later, they're back home. And most of the rumors I hear is like, oh, they drank away their money. When really, it's just like, no, they went through discouragement because nobody taught them how to write papers or this and that. So I think that was one of the huge things where nobody understood what we went through and the culture shock that we had to walk through. Nobody taught us or prepared us for that. And I think that's what took time for me to realize. I think it took third year in college to actually figure out, okay, I can do this. I can actually write papers. I can manage to do this stuff. And I remember seeing a few Indigenous kids come from Oxford House or Thompson, Manitoba to Eston, and I saw their struggles, and I kind of saw a bit of myself too, where it's just like, I do want to help them, but I don't know them very well. Like, I wanted to help them walk through their traumas, but I didn't know them personally to call some stuff out, So if that makes sense, I was just like, it took time for me to like get through that healing and get through what I was going through. And I voiced it so many times, but I felt like there were times where people weren't listening, or they were used to seeing Jared as who doesn't come to class. But it took time, and still I learned a lot from that too. A lot of character building for sure.
So what happened around you that helped you overcome that? Like, are there some people that have sown into you, spoken to you when you were at college that helped you?
Having everyone around me in college, like, I felt like this is not fair that I have to go through this. I wish everybody in my community felt what I felt, So having all these people really walking me through it and calling me to higher places, for sure, I definitely needed that. And I think that's what helped me get to where I am now.
That's good. And I think we'll get into more of that calling on your life in another episode that we're going to do with you. Amazing story. Thank you so much for being vulnerable with us today and sharing your heart and sharing your story. Thank you for joining another conversation on Journey with Care, where we inspire curious Canadians on their path of faith and living life with purpose in community. Journey with Care is an initiative of Care Impact, a Canadian charity dedicated to connecting and equipping the whole church to journey well in community. You can visit their website at careimpact.ca or visit journeywithcare.ca to get more information on weekly episodes, Journey with Prayer, and details about our upcoming events and meetups. You can also leave us a message, share your thoughts, and connect with like-minded individuals who are on their own journeys of faith and purpose. Thank you for sharing this podcast and helping these stories reach the community. Together we can explore ways to journey in a good way. And always remember to stay curious.